Hey, welcome back, Googleization Nation. Second live stream today. We had Chris Rogers on at 1 o'clock, and if you missed that, that's live up on my feed, and it's on YouTube. Just check it out. We were talking all about voice search and SEO for recruiters and how people are going to need a better job and technology. So we had a great interview, but we got another great interview lined up. I've got Oscar Trimboli all the way from Australia. It's bright and early there for most of us on the East Coast, or actually anywhere in the U.S. We're in the afternoon, but welcome to my show, the Crazy Shift Show. So we need to listen carefully for that one, right, Oscar?
Indeed, you do. G'day, Ira. And in the evening over on the other side of the Atlantic, they're voting in their general election. So who knows what today will bring.
That's true, yeah, and here they're looking to impeach our president. So, politics aside, there's a lot of distractions, and I guess that's what we're going to talk about today. You have a new book, and again, for anybody, I got it, and it's like, what did I get here? And I just want to show it. I got to get it in front of the camera. So it's Deep Listening. It's a box set. There's a little book in here. There's a bunch of cards. And we're going to talk about deep listening. But just to give it a little background, then I'll have you kind of expand your introduction, how you got into this, Oscar. One of the things that I've been in this business 25 years. I've always, tried to be a good listener. My my ex-wife told me I wasn't a very good listener. Oftentimes people just say, you're just not listening to me. And you try, and it's, you're not sure, is it my communication style? You share a great stat, and I'm not going to steal your thunder there, about why that's a problem, because my mind's always going much faster than what my mouth is moving and probably than I'm hearing as well. So we're going to talk about all those things. But years ago, I got into this business, and I've always been fascinated with assessments. That's the core part of my business. And I used a profile called DISC. And what DISC was about using the words that you should use. What resonates with you? So if I'm talking about winning and power and influence and striving and competition, and somebody else is concerned with accuracy or steadiness or preciseness, or I talk too fast, or I talk too slow, or I talk too loud. There was all those parts of communication. And so I certainly have a strong commitment to what you do. And want to be able to learn more. And that's probably why this resonated with me, to be able to take it to another level, because certainly taking an assessment and understand what you should do doesn't solve the problems, because people don't apply it, on a regular basis. And you provide, much more practical tips of how to use this on a day-to-day basis. And then there was also this thing called NLP, which was neuro-linguistic programming, which people tried to get into that years ago. And again, it was into the tonation and understand that and how to get in sync with somebody else. Now NLP is natural language processing, which is actually the last thing. I won't even say her name, but the Apple version of Alexa and Cortana, because every time I said I'll do it, Siri, I don't know if she'll open up, but Siri happened to go on during the show. But all in all, we have a lot of distractions. There's a lot. We're trying to impress people. We're trying to change people. The buzz, going into 2020 is we need a digital transformation. We need to have cultural transformation. And the only way that's going to happen is to get people to listen, because people just tune out. There's so many distractions, so much noise out there. So a lot to cover. We hope to have everybody for maybe 30 minutes or so, and appreciate everybody being here. You can see across the sign if you want to get more notices like this. I'm doing these 2 or 3 times a week to get more information about that podcast, and they're all free. So again, free great way to learn. Join Googleization Nation. But Oscar, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get into how did deep listening become your passion?
Oh, I think it's a number of decades that it came about. It was really a moment where I was in a negotiation between Seattle head office, Singapore regional office, and Microsoft Australia, where I was a marketing director. It was a 90-minute meeting. It was a budget negotiation. At the 20-minute mark, my vice president looked across the table at me and said, "I need to see you after this meeting." And in that moment, all I could think about was, how many months' salary have I got left in my bank account? Because sure enough, I'm going to get sacked. And it's like that moment when your wife says to you, "Ira, we need to speak." It's the words that everybody dreads. Wind the clock forward 2 hours. I sit down with Tracy, and she looks me straight in the eye. She says, "You have no idea what you did at the 20-minute mark, did you?" And I said, "No, Tracy." She said, "The way you listen changed the complete direction of the meeting. And if you could code that, you could change the world." And all I could say in that moment was, "Do you mean code or code?" I wasn't sure if she was trying to get me to write it as a training course or software. And because we were working at Microsoft, she's kind of, "Yeah, Oscar, code. So I'm on a quest to create 100 million deep listeners in the world, Ira. And one of the ways I'm going to do it is with that technology called software, and build a listening coach. But the journey to get there is about writing books and training courses to make sure that
Been there.
the details in terms of, does the 5 levels of listening that I developed work and improve people's listening? We have a longitudinal database of 1,400 people where we're tracking their listening improvements. And for most of us, although we learnt maths, we learnt science, we learnt language at school, one thing we didn't learn was how to listen. Most of us don't know what subtract, divide, multiplication, addition is. When it comes to listening, we don't have shortcuts. And a lot of the literature tells us to get focused on the speaker as the starting point in listening. And although that's useful, it's actually the wrong starting point. We need to understand that we need to listen to ourselves first, because most of us turn up to a conversation with the last meeting in our head, or the next meeting in our head, or what we have to do that evening, or what we have to do that weekend. In fact, it's happening for people right now watching this live stream, Ira, no doubt. They've got other browser tabs open.
Right.
They might be texting on their cell phone. They might be noticing a coworker coming across the building at the moment. And that is the biggest thing that gets in the way for most people. In our database, we ask people, what gets in the way of your listening? 86% of people said distractions, things that are notifications, vibrations, bells, buzzers, dings and dongs, whether they're email, off your cell phone, off your iPad, visual distractions, internal distractions. Distractions are what are getting in the way of most people listening. And it's critical for us to understand that if we give attention and we focus ourselves prior to turning up to the meeting, all those browser tabs in our mind will be shut down, and we'll have some working memory to actually focus on the conversation. So for a lot of us, when we realize that distraction is the number one thing we can focus on, our listening productivity will double and triple really, really quickly, Ira.
So a couple of things that you said in there that I wanted to ask. So if certainly I need to listen to what I'm saying, to go, and you go through the 5 levels, beyond that. But if I'm trying to get people to listen to me, is the burden on me? I guess what's my role to get other people to listen to me? I always say it's sort of reading between the lines. When I mentioned that NLP before, which was a neuro-linguistic programming, you observe body language, certainly seeing people on their, texting or looking away or falling asleep, whatever it might be. I mean, that's obviously body language, but, it always if somebody leans forward, it means they're more engaged. If they're leaning back and they're looking up, if they look up to the left, they look up to the right. So there's all these things going, and people just got completely distracted because now you're not focused on what you're saying. You're focused on what the other people are doing. So I guess where does this fit? Where does deep listening fit? Because it's got to be a two-way street of how do how does my audience become a better listener? But if they don't know all this stuff, how do I help them get there? So.
Yeah, so listening, as you said, is a simultaneous equation. You're speaking from stage and they're listening in the audience. So there is a responsibility for the speaker. And the responsibility comes back to this simple rule, the 125/900 rule. If you understand that we speak at about 125 to 150 words a minute, yet we think at 900 words a minute. And when we think at 900 words a minute, the likelihood that the first thing out of our mouth is what we think we want to say, it's like a 1 in 9 chance, or 11, 12, 13%, roughly. Now, Ira, I'm at the stage in my life where I visit a doctor 3-4 times a year. And if Dr. John, he's my doctor, said to me, "Hey, Oscar, great news, 11% chance of surviving this surgery, or an 11% chance that this intervention will be successful," I don't know about you, Ira, but I'm asking for a second opinion. I'm probably asking for a third opinion at 11% success. Yet most of us don't seek a second opinion when it comes to speaking. When somebody says something to you, the first thing out of their mouth is not what they're thinking. The way to prove this is these simple phrases that are words like, well, actually what I meant to say was, or they'll say, actually, the most important thing is. So as a speaker, your first responsibility is to rehearse so that the first thing that you say isn't on stage, as an example. The next responsibility you have as a speaker is to tell a story first and a statistic second, because the human brain is wired for stories first. The other thing the human brain is wired for really well is metaphors. If you're communicating a complex topic or a complex job description, I was talking to an actuary only 2 weeks ago, and I said, "I don't know what an actuary does. Could you explain what an actuary does?" As if I was a 7-year-old. 5 minutes later, they'd finished, and I said, "So you're like those people on the beach who have a metal detector and sift through miles and miles of sand and find the gold, the watch, the rings on the beach." And she said, "Yeah, that's exactly what we do." And what I just did there was explain the very complex topic through a metaphor. The reasons metaphors work is you already know the concept. So if you're communicating new and complex ideas in your Googleization nation, Ira, make sure you land that concept around a metaphor that people already know. In your mind, when I talk about the 125/900 rule, your mind is like a washing machine. It's on wash cycle. It's agitated. It's sudsy. It's moving around. The water's soapy. And it's not till you go through the rinse cycle, which is speaking, that you start to put some clarity around your ideas. So, Ira, there is a huge responsibility on the speaker. For extra points as a ninja, use pause. Pause is critical. Pause lets the audience catch up with the idea that you've just said. And pause is also a mental circuit breaker to go, what they've just said is really important. Now, the opposite is true, Ira, the 125/400 rule. I speak at 125 words a minute. You can listen at 400 words a minute. So in the audience, they can listen 3 times faster than you can speak. So you need to up your tempo or use stories really well, because stories will keep them engaged longer. And that's the difference between a distracted listener and a deep listener, is knowing you're distracted. I get as distracted as anybody else. The difference is I know how to get back into the conversation faster. So the 125/900 rule, speakers should rehearse. The 125/400 rule, the listener knows they'll be distracted.
I mean, that's amazing, because again, it goes back into what we talked about, the pace. When I'm passionate and when I'm up there, it's this fine line about me speaking faster, and then I always get these comments: you talk too fast, or you seem like you rush through it. But the one thing I learned, and I didn't know this purposely until you just said it, that I've learned to take a breath. That I've learned to do that pause. So I can speed up the conversation, but then if I stop and don't just say, "Okay, now to the next slide," or "We're running out of time, we got to go to the next part." As long as you pause, then you're interrupting that and allowing the person to sort of catch up, I guess. Am I correct?
Yeah, and the listener is figuring out, how do I take that concept that Ira just mentioned and apply it in my real life? So that pause gives them a moment to go grab the content, grab the concept, and then how do I actually apply it in real life? And that's value. That's where you see the value in a stage-driven presentation. Is like, it's not enough for you to talk about what you do. Its value is derived from how do I apply what Ira's just said in my real day-to-day life. So that pause gives them a moment, and typically that's that moment. If they're taking notes or they're taking notes on a device, that's the moment where they'll take notes, because that pause will go, yeah, I can apply that to the next interview or the next job specification that I'm writing up.
So you mentioned that I read this somewhere on the site, and it was an old statistic I saw somewhere and I forgot about it, that 55% of our day is spent listening, and only 2% of us have ever been trained on listening. And I used to talk about that all the time. When I left my practice and moved and started this business, I shared space with a sales training company, and that was a big part of that, of what that we've never actually been trained to listen. And whether you're a salesperson, whether you're an interviewer, a recruiter, a boss, a manager, a leader, we have to listen better, and that's what the whole purpose of this is. And so naturally we're not very good at it. By not doing that, sometimes it's hard for us to do the positive. Okay, I know I need to listen better. I need to take a course. I need to step aside. I need to slow down. I need to have less distractions. Put all that stuff away. But there are real costs associated with not listening.
Yeah, in organizations, you lose great customers, you lose great staff, you don't hire the right staff, your projects run over schedule, your projects run over budget. Not listening creates conflict in the workplace, it creates confusion in the workplace, it creates email volume that's completely unnecessary, because if you were listening, you wouldn't have to send a whole bunch of emails around as well. And ultimately, it can create chaos in some workplaces as well too, Ira. So whether it's declining market share, whether you're not able to attract the right kind of talent, that all comes down to a lack of listening, because listening is so fundamental. The more senior you are in an organization, the more of your day you spend listening. By the second decade of your career, most people will have 5 training courses in how to speak, yet 0 training courses in how to listen.
Right.
And yet, the more senior you are, the more of your day is spent listening. So one of the big productivity hacks of the 21st century, if speaking was what we learned in the 20th century, the big productivity hack of the 21st century is learning how to listen. And if all you learn was these 2 simple phrases, tell me more, and what else, you would triple your listening productivity immediately. Why those 2 simple phrases so potent? If you use those 2 simple phrases, what you'll notice is the speaker will pause, usually sigh or take in a deep breath and go, well, Ira, what we should be talking about right now is, or they'll say, the most important thing we should be talking about right now is, or they'll use the phrase, actually what we need to talk about is. And in that moment, they're accessing the next 125 words in their mind that's stuck, because they've got 900 words a minute that they're thinking at, yet they're stuck in a speaking pattern that can only get 100 to 125 out. These words, particularly in recruitment, I remember I did this course for an internal recruiting organization in their biomedical company, and Jason sent me an email about 3 weeks later. Now, I know what pressure people are under for recruitment. They have to fill open job positions really well,
Right.
high quality, really quickly. But what that means is they tend to ask questions quickly and accept the first superficial answer. And if you ask these 2 questions, which Jason did, and he sent me an email saying, hey, Oscar, I didn't believe you with the what else and tell me more. So I decided to try it on the candidates I was struggling to listen to. And there was this one candidate, Michelle, who I asked that question to. And what I learned very quickly in the what else conversation, I was able to understand her values much better, and integrity showed up much higher in the interview by me asking the next set of questions. Now, what happened with Michelle was she wasn't a great fit for that role, but she was a great fit for the organization, Oscar, and we were able to put her in the perfect role 6 months later, and she's been with the organization now for about a year. And Jason put that down to simply the what else question. The other thing for recruiters to bear in mind is questions with more than 7 words are biased questions. In fact, they're not even questions at all, they're statements. So the more open-ended and the shorter the question, the more likely you are able to elicit something that they have been thinking about, but haven't been able to express. So there's a 1-2 punch here with the what else, tell me more, and don't keep circulating those. The third punch in the series is to use pause. Sometimes you can elicit the identical response by you just zipping it up. Now, in the West, we're addicted to speaking, yet in the East and ancient cultures, silence is a sign of wisdom, it's a sign of authority, it's something that's used to stimulate powerful conversations. Now, again, if you're going, oh, well, I need to get this conversation done quickly, great, no problem, but at what cost? You might be putting the wrong candidate in the wrong role. You might be closing that open job rec out much quicker than you thought you would. But what did you miss? Were you focused on the role, or you're focused on their career trajectory path and how they'll fit in the second and third role in the organization? What else? Tell me more. And using silence is the way to unpick the 125-900 rule, and will make you more powerful, not just in when you're interviewing for the role, but also when you're taking the brief from the business about how to put the role together as well, Ira.
So there's, I know, and I don't want to miss this because, we can talk off forever about that. I could talk with you forever about this. So obviously I am listening. You talk about 5 levels of listening.
Yeah.
Can you go through that? Because I thought that was really interesting. And again, I probably thought about that to myself prior to that, but never in any type of a hierarchy.
Yeah. So the 5 levels of listening are, the first level is level 1, listen to yourself. Level 2, listen to the content. Level 3, listen for the context. Level 4, listen for what's unsaid. And level 5, listen for meaning. Now, we can spend a bit of time on each of those, Ira, or you can kind of direct me on, pick your own adventure.
Well, you're right. I mean, we can do all that. So I think the 2 that intrigued me is your third and fourth. So one is because I've always, it's sometimes what's not said. What aren't they saying? And that may be what did they mean to say, or what, reading between the lines, whatever. So I think that was one area that I want you to explore a little bit.
Yeah, and if Yoda from Star Wars was here, he'd spend a lot of time talking about listening for what's unsaid. And if we come back to that 125-900 rule, most of what people want to say is stuck in their head because they can't get it out fast enough. Now, for most of us, we want to accept the very first thing they say and be polite and have a conversation about that. But we want to fully explore the landscape of their idea. And you kind of touched on the context as well. So one of the powerful questions is, when did you first have this idea? Or when was this first an issue? You'll notice that that's a question of less than 7 words. But what we want to do is explore the backstory that sits behind what they're trying to say. Because a lot of us come into a conversation and we feel like we walked into a movie theater about 25 minutes into the movie, and we're trying to figure out who are all the actors in this story, and how does this plot fit together. Now, I use this phrase quite a lot, and people say to me, hey, Oscar, one of the things I notice from you is you're happy to admit you're distracted, but you also spend a lot of time saying, oh, could you just take me back to the beginning of this story? And in the taking back to the beginning of the story, all the pieces of the movie plot come together for us in a much crisper way, and we can enjoy the rest of the movie without using a whole bunch of mental load to figure out, where does this, was that their boss, or was that their boss's boss that they were explaining during the situation? So for a lot of us, just understanding the backstory will explode what the possibilities are in the conversation, not just for us, but also for the speaker. So that simple phrase will unpick not only context for you, but it'll open up the landscape about what else is unsaid. You know, you've just had Thanksgiving recently in the US, and I'm often asked what happens when your uncle is at Thanksgiving dinner and you know he's going to have the same conversation with you over and over and over again, and it might be about politics.
You must have been at our table.
Yeah. And people hold beliefs really tightly. One way to unpick that really simply is just to ask them, when was the first time you formed this opinion? And this person I was speaking to, it was literally a Thanksgiving dinner. They sent me an email a week later and they went, wow, I thought my uncle was rather belligerent and held his views in a wrong way. But when I understood that he'd formed these views when he was 13 and dirt poor, where they were eating scraps out of the garden, which was the vegetable patch, I started to understand much better why he held these ideas. And wow, the conversations I have with my uncle now, they're completely different. But very few of us would take the time to ask that question. We'd just roll our eyes, blank out. I call it the lost listener, one of the four villains of listening. And we will appear vague, but we're just letting that uncle's story wash over our head. So for a lot of us, ask the question about where this started, and that'll start to unpick something that's useful and productive in the conversation from there.
And well, that's so powerful because, as I said, right now is our country is certainly politically quite divided, entrenched. You just need to turn the TV on, and it's created a lot of problems at dinner, beyond dinner tables with friendship and so forth. And again, just in the business I'm in, and not that I always agree with where they're coming from, or even saying, hey, well, that's how it was, 60, 70, 80 years ago. But there's a lot of benefits, and you just got to let go of that. But the reality is that we each have our frame of reference and our context, and sometimes just having. I often say, again, using DISC, and I when people call me, and I don't do it. I don't. DISC is just one of the assessments I use, and I don't do a lot of training or consulting around it. But I believe it. It's a powerful tool. But when or something even like a Myers-Briggs. But when I do that and I'm building teams, I said, listen, what will happen is just by sharing the results, just by understanding where you're coming from and how you might be seen differently, and putting in the context, will eliminate 50% of the problems. I said, if you're looking for a cure and to eliminate all conflict and make everybody happy and everybody understand, and there's no more communication problems, I'm not the guy. I don't know anybody who is that tells you they can do that. It's a problem. But it's amazing. I mean, and again, I've been doing this for 25 years, and each time that happens, there immediately is about half of those tensions. Well, I thought you said this because you said it that way because you didn't like me, or I didn't know that's, I'd walk by your office and you used to keep it open. Now you keep it shut. So I didn't think you liked me. And I go, no, I just don't like, when I'm concentrating, I don't like you just stopping in, plopping down on the chair and having a cup of coffee to say good morning, because that's your style. And that's exactly what you're saying is just taking a step back and go, so why are you pro or against? Why are you so adamant for this person or that belief or that vice versa? So quite powerful.
Yeah, so great. I'm going to do something real time with you, Ira. Why-based questions are loaded with judgment. So try and avoid putting why at the beginning of the question, whether I've spoken to FBI hostage negotiators or telephone-based suicide counselors. Why-based questions trigger childhood memories when your parents said, why did you spill the milk? Why didn't you clean up your room? And if we simply ask, when did this opinion get formed, or how did you come about forming this opinion? It's exactly the same question, but the why will trigger them to become defensive. So when you use why, you need to be in really good relationship with somebody, and typically in the second half of a conversation. If you're going to use that right at the beginning, defensively, the person you're speaking to will adopt a defensive posture, because the word why automatically implies that they're wrong. That's how they hear the word why. So just be careful with using why. Use why deliberately, use why appropriately. It has its place. But on those topic that you like, the political one, I'd ask, hey, how did you come to form this opinion? Or when did you form this opinion? And who was around you when you formed this opinion? You'll get the same result, but you won't get triggering them into a defensive posture, because the minute you go, why? Well, they're going to go, well, all I'm going to do is figure out how to convince you about why you're wrong in asking me that question. So similar thing plays out in interviews, budget negotiations, sales consultations, all of that. Often people are told, start with why. That's true, but make sure you're in a good relationship with somebody when you start with why.
Well, for me, I mean, that's worth the half hour and that we spent, but certainly for a lot of other people, there's a couple other things. So let's keep going for just a few minutes, because you went through the 5 levels. You mentioned earlier, we talked about the cost, and certainly I can hear people say, well, we'd like to bring in Oscar, or we understand the value of this. But is there any kind of proof? Is there an ROI? Other than some of the soft stuff that you shared, it's like the employee, that one, Michelle, I think it was.
Yeah.
That, say I was listening. Michelle didn't fit that role, but fit another role, and it all worked out. But are there some? You've worked with some pretty significant companies. It's a pretty impressive list. What have they been able to document any improvements, whether it's, shorter sales times, less turnover, better hires,
The promise of deep listening is simply this: you'll get 4 hours a week back in your schedule when we look across the database of 14.
These days.
Yeah, when we look across the database of 1,400 people, the thing they comment on most consistently is conversations that they thought would take longer, in fact, go deeper, but it actually shortens the conversation in the long run. There's fewer misunderstandings, there's fewer miscosts, there's fewer misinterpretations. In sales, for example, we talk about this thing called the sales funnel, and the sales funnel is supposed to start wide at the top and come narrow, and that would be the magical sales funnel. But most of the sales organizations I work with, their sales funnel feels like a bell shape that's wider in the middle than it is at the top. And they have a lot of sales opportunities in the middle, but what they haven't done is listen for what's unsaid. So in sales situations, we talk about improved sales velocity, both to qualify in and qualify out. So we increase sales velocity by about 12%. In terms of the speed at which an opportunity is either, yes, that's a good fit for us, no, it's not a good fit for us. And they're the 2 measures that people go in terms of currency of time and currency of revenue. They're the 2 critical ones. And then finally, retention. Staff, everybody's heard the Gallup research. Everybody's been told people don't leave organizations, they leave their managers. That's true. But if you actually double click on that survey and establish the number 1 reason why people leave managers in their organization, they don't listen to me. They don't do one-on-ones. They don't turn up to one-on-ones. They shorten one-on-ones. They're distracted in one-on-ones. All these things mean you lose great staff. And as a result, the cost to the organization of retraining new people is much higher than the competition. Whether it's sporting teams or business organizations, it's time together that increases the productivity of teams. One of the most winningest sporting teams in the world, the Brazilian football team, the soccer team, the New Zealand rugby team, they have international records of winning above 90%. And one of the statistics that they say reason why they perform so high is they don't turn over the teams. They have tenure in the teams compared to their competition, who chop and change team members really regularly. So if you want to increase performance, let's make sure that people playing well together, and the way they do that is they listen well together.
Yeah. Again, so many nuggets in there where you can. It's like there's a lot of different rabbit holes we can go down. Thanks very much for that. There was a question I had, but I was listening and I went out. It was one of those things in my the difference between what's in my head and what comes out of my mouth, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I know what it was. It was about the sales philosophy, but it was also about the interview. So, one of the challenges is I know there's a lot of hiring managers. Recruiters love it. That's their business. Hiring
Yeah.
managers hate interviewing because it just takes so long, and I don't know what to ask, and and then they're rushed and they are distracted. The opportunity, and I'll go back to what you said about not asking why, asking those multiple questions, which I always suggest. I always had this rule of three, that you have to ask the third question to actually figure out what the real answer was. So you ask the first question, they told you what they pre-planned, and then you say, well, how did you get there? And so so I've already been very
Great question. Well, how did you get there? Less than 7 words.
So how did you you said you had $12.5 million of sales and you quadrupled that in 4 years, and so that's great. That's what we're looking to do in our company. No, the next question is, can you tell me how you did that? And then similar to your question is what wasn't said is what could you have done differently? Or how can you have done it differently? Or why did it, somebody says, oh, I came in under budget. I came in on time, on budget. Was there anything you could have done to come in under budget and in less time? I mean, oh, that's a great question. So they write it down and they do it by script. And I said, but that's not the first question you ask. That's always the third, and that's basically what you're saying.
And can you see the 125/900 rule playing? You got to about 500 words in your various questions there, so you've got half of what they're thinking out of their head, and it makes for a much more productive conversation than to accept the superficial answer.
Sure.
And there are lots of organizations out there that have scripted questions, and they don't have great hiring fits, and as a result there's a big cost there. So listening deeply to the question. The other thing, Ira, is for candidates, if you're a candidate listening, make sure you answer the question the interviewer actually asked, and it is okay to confirm. So the question you were asking me was, or what I heard you ask me was, or could I just clarify that what you asked is about growth versus profitability in the question you just asked me? Because in the race to revenue, we might get unprofitable revenue. So I want to talk to you about both how I grew that $12 million revenue, but also how I did it in a really profitable way and maintain margins. Can you see already I'm a kind of candidate that you go, wow, yeah, that's the kind of listening I want from the candidate. So most candidates, funnily enough, the first screen is they didn't answer my question. How often have you put the recruiter on the other pile, the candidate on the other pile, because they didn't listen to the question? As a recruiter, your responsibility is to signal that at the beginning of the interview. Hey, I interview every day of the week and I ask a group of questions, and some of these questions might not be familiar to you. It's okay for you to clarify my questions. It won't count against you during the interview. And a lot of candidates will relax from that point on.
So you talked about the sales funnel, and again, we want to kind of bring this to a close, sort of wrap it up. But you talked about the sales funnel, but the recruitment funnel, which I talk about all the time. I actually, in my online course about improving the candidate experience, we talk about the funnel. So it's people, candidates. One is knowing, either going to your company website or understanding that you have an opening and they want to explore that, and then going down through that process. One of the biggest challenges today is well, as you describe it, it's the velocity of going through. Yeah. And frankly, I like your idea. What was the analogy you used? It's not a funnel; it's a
bell.
It's a bell. It's a bell. Yeah. And that's how recruitment is. You get all these candidates in there, they get a delay, and then all of a sudden it gets hung up at the interview stage. Because the hiring manager is away, or they postpone it, or they're too busy and they can't do that. So if you could be more precise, if you use deep listening and we're asking the right questions, certainly somebody who's a good candidate you want to spend more time with. But there's a lot of people that probably they can spend half or 2/3 or a third of the time and already know they're not a good fit, and stop wasting your time and the other person's fine. And then not dread that. We don't have to put that off because we can do more in less time. So that was incredibly valuable. Again, my mind's connecting the dots, and you'll hear more about that. We may have to do another show specifically about that, or record a lesson for my online course. So
happy to.
We're just about the 40-minute spot here. So I know everybody's time is precious, and we're gonna have people being distracted and lose them shortly. What are what are the sort of the nuggets? I mean, we covered a lot of territory here, and I'll write this up, and we'll be able to get that out, and people have an opportunity to listen to this in the future. But what are the kind of the 1 or 2 or 3 rules that you can, your elevator speech for deep listening?
Yeah, I was speaking to a Japanese company about 3 years ago. The CEO got up on stage and said, "I've read Oscar's book. It is so easy to do, but difficult to practice." So let me tell you, as someone who practices deep listening every day, I try to get better. I'm never going to be perfect. Here's what I do when I step into a building lobby to improve my listening productivity. The minute I cross the lobby floor, my cell phone gets switched off, it gets put in my bag. When I move into the lift or the elevator, I try and put my back against the wall. And if nobody's in that elevator, I'll close my eyes. I'll breathe 3 deep breaths. And by the time I get out of the elevator, I'm completely centered for that conversation. When I go to reception, I'm often offered refreshments. I always ask for a glass of water because a hydrated brain is a listening brain, and I ask for a glass of water for anybody participating in the meeting with me as well. So if you practice those 3 simple things, switch off the distractions, breathe deeply, drink water, your listening productivity will double immediately, and you'll get 4 hours back in your day. And if you want to kind of go and find more information, Ira has been kind enough to, if you go to my website there, you can download the 5 myths of listening, and more importantly, what to do about it. And they're all as practical as what I just mentioned. Remove the distractions, drink water, breathe deeply.
And if anybody wants to purchase this, there we are. So where can they get a hold of that?
Yeah, you can follow the links on the website or visit Amazon.com or your favorite book reseller, and they'll be stocking the books there.
Yeah, excellent. And again, I plan to get through the rest of it, but just getting it prepped for this there was a lot of nuggets, and this was fun. This was fun, Oscar. I wish you the best of luck, and hopefully we got a couple more listeners on that way to 100 million deep listener.
Ira, thanks for listening.
So you have a great day. Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.